This is Bolton & Co here on Sky News, and as the world watches events in North Africa and the Gulf, America's reaction is being just as closely scrutinised. This lunchtime, the White House urged restraint on the Bahraini government. Bahrain is the latest country to see anti-government protests, but the kingdom is also of particular strategic importance since it's the home of the US Navy's Fifth Fleet. Well, joining me now from Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. is Republican Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, who's a member of the US Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Fortenberry, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Do you support, I know you're from a different party, but do you support that urging of restraint on the Bahraini government from the White House?
Well, certainly the United States is always going to stand for the highest aspirations of people who are trying to peacefully protest. We're going to stand for institutions, processes, and principles. With that said, as you mentioned, Bahrain and the United States have had a close working relationship for a very long time on security matters, but throughout the Middle East we've got extraordinary change underway, and exactly where that change will end up, none of us clearly knows. But as people are trying to peacefully present themselves in a new way in front of their governments, the United States has, I think, a responsibility along with the international community to support the highest aspirations of people as they seek rights and a new way to redress grievances with their government.
Do you think that President Obama has given a sufficient lead on this wave of change, as you call it? I mean, he has seemed to flip-flop a little.
Well, this situation is very complex and fluid, and again, we're not exactly sure where it will end up. It wasn't very long ago, just several weeks back, that the situation with Egypt and the United States, we have a strong working partnership in a variety of ways. They've been a strong ally throughout the Middle East in terms of being a moderating influence. They've held a peace. It's been somewhat cold with Israel for 30 years. So up until a month ago, all of those processes and institutions were within a range of what we would consider normal over the last 3 decades. But now, with people not having the civil capacity in Egypt and other places to have redress with their government, the tension and despair poured out into the streets, and we saw what happened. So this is a new moment for the Middle East, and it's important for the entire international community, again, to stand with people as they pursue peacefully their highest aspirations. It's important also to remember that the pillars of democracy are a respect for human rights and a responsibility for the principles of self-determination and the rule of law. So all of this is very fluid in the Middle East as these modern ideas, modern concepts that are being fostered by new social media are bumping up against traditional institutions. So clearly what has to happen is civil space has to develop and civil capacities to give redress to people's interest or their despair as they petition their governments.
But do you feel that as the nation, the global superpower, which likes to call itself the land of the free, that people such as yourself, the US Congress, should now be saying, yes, we support this change, we want this change, it is time for those stale regimes to step aside?
Well, ultimately, the type of regime that exists in Bahrain or anywhere else is up to the people of Bahrain and the people throughout the Middle East. We live in the world is complicated. We project on other peoples an ability to achieve the liberal type of democracies that we enjoy. But again, the fundamental point here is that democracy rests on 2 pillars. First is an understanding and respect for human dignity and human rights, and secondly, it's a responsibility for the rule of law. So to position various countries in the Middle East, or help position various countries in the Middle East to expand civil capacity that can give rise to institutions that can provide sustainability for vibrant democracies is a long process perhaps, but that would be the United States' stance as we work through the historic and complex relationships that we currently have.
How worried are you that the new regimes, perhaps freer regimes in places like Egypt, possibly Bahrain, Tunisia, will be less friendly to US and quite possibly Western interests than the old dictatorships which went before?
Well, it's quite possible they will be less friendly. Now, what we're concerned about in Egypt is while we, again, try to stand for the peaceful and highest aspirations of people as they try to change their government in a manner that is more respectful of human rights and human dignity and reflects the principles of self-determination, we want to ensure that this, first of all, doesn't collapse or degenerate into chaos and violence, nor empower groups, entities, extremists who would actually use democratic ideals to undermine the principles of democracy itself. So this is a very delicate moment throughout the Middle East, and it's not clear to anyone as to where this outcome will be. In Egypt, I think the outcome has been what we could have hoped for with the Egyptian military, which is a highly respected and credible institution in the eyes of the people, taking over the transition. Now they must uphold their responsibility to provide an orderly and peaceful transition to new elections, as well as change the Constitution to ensure that rights are protected. And this is particularly important in a place like Egypt, where certain groups have declared that women and Christian minorities, for instance, would not have rights to full participation in the governing structures. So it is a little unclear as to where this will come out, but that's why I want to continue to focus on the ideal of a vibrant democracy, if that is the ultimate pursuit of people who are pouring into the streets, is fundamentally a respect for human rights and human dignity and full participation of all people in the governing structures.
And in practical terms, you've made it clear that you believe this is a question of self-determination for the people of the countries involved. So in practical terms, what can the United States, or for that matter Britain in a much smaller way, do about what's going on? What should we do?
Well, I think we're living in an extraordinary age where I'm talking to you overseas, people are on Facebook and other social media talking about these ideals. Just a few short years ago, this would have been unthinkable. So the conversation that we're having now about the orderly and peaceful transition to new governing ideals that actually respects human dignity and respects human rights and gives people options that they may not have before is really quite incredible. With that said, this is complex. It doesn't necessarily happen overnight. You have to have a philosophical basis that's enculturated for the ideals of a vibrant democracy, if that's where things go. And you have to have the institutions that are going to give rise and protect the rights that we take for granted. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of participation, and urging or taking action even against government, but through peaceful democratic processes. So we're in a delicate moment, a fluid moment, and it's not clear where the outcome exactly is. But it is, in a certain sense, an extraordinary moment as old relationships are being re-examined in light of new ideals that could be for great good, but we don't want to see things collapse or degenerate into violence or chaos or uncertainty and actually undermine these ideals of democracy that we've been talking about.
Congressman Fortenberry, thank you very much indeed for joining us live from Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much.